In this section, we will discuss catches, incomplete passes, and when it's legal or illegal to bat a ball during a pass. The process of catching the ball has several steps that all must be met in order for a pass to be considered complete. First, the player must have firm control of the ball. This means the ball is not bobbling around in his hands. This must take place before any part of the ball touches the ground. So when a player who catches the ball underhand near the ground, he must do so without the ball hitting the ground at any point. Otherwise, he has trapped the ball and the pass is incomplete and the play is dead. Second, the player must be in bounds when making the catch. This is accomplished by having any part of his body touching inbounds while nothing is outside the boundary. A simple toe touch inbounds in which the player drags his foot with secure control of the ball meets this criteria. However, if a player jumps up and comes down first with his toes inbounds and then having his heel immediately touch out of bounds, we would have an incomplete pass. We need to be very alert when a player is attempting to make a catch near the boundary. Also, remember a player who is touched out of bounds before jumping is still out of bounds until he comes back fully in bounds. Third, a player must maintain control of the ball, quote, long enough. A lot of times we use the term makes a football move to help define this time period, and it's not a bad rule of thumb. A football move can be defined as being able to hand or pitch the ball, turn to move upfield, advance or retreat with the ball, avoid or ward off an opponent, tuck the ball, or extend the ball away from the body. Be particularly aware of a player who tries to turn or move with the ball to be sure he has secured possession. He might be able to make these moves while the ball is still bobbling in his hands. We also need to make sure possession is secured during contact with an opponent. If he hasn't had time to make a football move and is hit and the ball hits the ground, then it's an incomplete pass rather than a fumble. Finally, a player who is going to the ground while making the catch must maintain possession through the contact with the ground. This means that if an airborne player attempts to catch the ball and secures possession, he cannot lose this possession while hitting the ground. If he does, and the ball hits the ground, then the ball is incomplete. Also, if a player who lands firmly in bounds with a part of the body and then continues to go out of bounds as he goes to the ground, must have the ball secure the whole time. If, after contacting the ground out of bounds, the ball bobbles, then we have an incomplete pass even if the ball never hits the ground. Recoveries also have a similar criteria. Recoveries deal with a loose ball from a fumble or a grounded backwards pass. We need to be certain that all of these criteria have been met before ruling that a catch or recovery has been made. An airborne receiver is a player who is not in contact with the ground outside of the normal motion of running. When running, there can be a period when both feet are off the ground, but we do not consider this to be an airborne player. We are looking for a player who is jumping or diving and nothing is in contact with the ground. This player must start from an inbounds position, meaning everything in contact with the ground is completely inbounds, and then returns to the ground as mentioned during the process of a catch. If a player jumps into the air and has part of his foot on the boundary, he is considered out of bounds until he has fully reestablished himself as inbounds. Therefore, if this player were to touch the ball while in the air, the ball would be dead and the pass incomplete. There is an exception for an airborne player not coming down in bounds. If he secures possession of the ball in the air and is carried out of bounds by an opponent, the pass is complete and we would use forward progress to determine the next spot. However, a hard hit that simply knocks a player out of bounds does not qualify for this exception. You need to be certain that a player was carried, and we should look for maintained contact through a couple of steps by the opponent. Another thing that would need to be considered is if the player would have come back down in bounds had he not been carried. If the receiver is running towards the sideline, jumps for a catch, then an opponent follows him and quote unquote carries him out of bounds, then we must make a judgment as to if the player's own momentum would have caused him to go out of bounds on its own. A player running full speed might be able to jump a few yards while in the air, so keep this in mind when making the call. Forward progress is given to an airborne receiver who makes a catch in bounds. If the player jumps at the 40-yard line going in and secures possession and is then hit by an opponent and is downed at the 42-yard line, the next spot should be at the 40. Be sure to give credit to the receiver for the yards he has earned, just like we do in a running play. Also, when a player is near the goal line, we want to be able to see if possession was secured in the end zone or out of it when we have contact with an opponent. If it is secured above the end zone and the player is knocked out of the end zone while still in the air, it's a touchdown. We also have to consider if the receiver who is in the end zone and running back towards the field of play. If his own momentum would have carried him back across the goal line, then even if we have contact, we wouldn't have a touchdown in this case. A pass is incomplete when any of the following occurs. The ball touches the ground, the ball goes out of bounds, when an airborne player lands out of bounds, or when it touches a player who was out of bounds and who did not reestablish himself in bounds. Keep in mind, if at any point a loose ball is touched by a player out of bounds, the play is dead. These rules apply to both legal and illegal forward passes. After a legal forward pass is incomplete, the ball is returned to the previous spot for the next down. However, if we have an illegal forward pass that is incomplete, we have to consider the penalty enforcement. The ball is next placed at the spot of the foul, and then the penalty is enforced from there. If we have a foul for an illegal forward pass that takes place in the end zone, there isn't really any options for the next spot. A team can always decline a penalty, but because we still have to come back to the spot of the foul for the next spot, in this situation, the next spot is actually in the end zone. So the result would be a safety. Either way, if the penalty is accepted or declined in this play, the result is going to be a safety. Batting is a common way to defend a pass. Batting is the intentional striking of the ball with the hand or arm. There are certain times in which batting is illegal, but let's first look at when it is legal. A ball in player possession can be batted in any direction except forward when done by a teammate. We need to be alert to an opponent who is attempting to bat a ball in player possession to try to knock it loose. Make sure that he is making a legitimate attempt at the ball and not just striking the opponent. When it comes to loose balls being batted, there are certain restrictions. First, a forward pass can be batted in any direction, but only by eligible receivers. An ineligible receiver, such as an interior lineman, can never bat a forward pass. A backwards pass can be batted by any player, but not forward by the passing team. Keep in mind, this only applies to a pass that is in flight. Once the ball is grounded, it can never be batted by any player. Fumbles in flight can be batted any direction by any player. Remember, there is a difference between a fumble and a backward pass. A fumble cannot be intentional. And again, once the ball hits the ground, it can't be batted. The last two types of balls that can be batted deal with kicks. We'll cover them briefly here. First, a low scrimmage kick can be batted when trying to block the kick. It must take place in or behind the expanded neutral zone. The touch here on the ball by the receiving team is ignored. In a five-man crew, the linesman needs to make sure that he does not go downfield before the kick crosses the neutral zone so that he can have a good view of this contact when it happens. Finally, K can bat a ball near his opponent's goal line, back towards his own goal line to keep it from becoming a touchback. Remember, if any part of the ball breaks the goal line while in the air or on the ground, it's a touchback. To end this video again, When we're dealing with razor fine margins on judgment calls, here are some of the best ways to rule. First, if we aren't sure if the catch was completed and the ball comes out, we should err on the side of an incompletion. We want to be sure that the player has completely secured possession and has had enough time to make a football move. This helps prevent having a fumble when the ball was never fully in player possession. Second, when dealing with passes in which the receiver is on the ground and is making an underhand catch, we need to make sure we see the ball actually touch the ground. You need to have eyes on the ball when saying a ball has been trapped. If you can't see it, then give the benefit of the doubt to the receiver. This is a good opportunity to work together as a crew to come up with a decision. If one official has a view of the ball and sees the ball actually hit the ground, he should provide this information to the covering official, even if it's outside of its primary area. It's better to be right than to be fast making a call like this. Be sure we're confident in this call once it's made. Finally, if we have a situation in which the quarterback is scrambling and tries to throw the ball away, and the pass is batted before reaching the neutral zone, it can lead to some doubt. Remember, in order to legally ground a pass, it must make it to the neutral zone before hitting the ground. If we have a weak pass and can't be sure if it would have made it even without being batted, give the benefit of the doubt to the passer and say it would be. However, if we don't think there's a chance the pass would have made it without the bat, then it would be an intentional grounding foul.